Alrighty, friendos, welcome in. So some of you may have seen my hidden ghost abilities video, but since the new Ascension update, some things have changed. Instead of making a video just on the few ghosts whose abilities have changed, I thought I'd go ahead and remake the entire ghost abilities video, because there's definitely a few new things I've learned about how to test for these ghosts, and I just wanted one place you all could come to see these ghost abilities without having to go through like 2 different videos to see what changed, and so on and so forth. So without further ado, we are going to hop into these ghosts' hidden abilities. So these are abilities unique to like each ghost. Like each ghost has these certain behaviors that they do that can help you identify what type of ghost they are without any evidence. However, there are also some unique hidden abilities that have to do with evidence, which we will also talk about. So I'm just going to go straight to the journal, go from left to right, and we're going to talk about each ghost. So starting with Spirit. The Spirit's unique ability is pretty lame. The main tell for Spirit is that if the Spirit can hunt you, so like your sanity is low enough, below like 50%, and you smudge the Spirit, it will have to wait 3 minutes to then hunt you. And the way you want to smudge the ghost and set a timer is I usually do it during a hunt. So like I'll be looping the ghost, saying like the kitchen of Tanglewood or Willow. I'll smudge the ghost to go and hide. And as soon as I hit right click and smudge the ghost, I start a timer, which I can link the timer that I use in the description. You can set up some hotkeys on your keyboard, make it super easy. Like my hotkey is 1. I just smudge the ghost, hit 1, and then go and hide. You could also smudge a ghost outside of the hunt, but you have to make sure that you're like in the same room as the ghost. And so if the ghosts were happen to like wander out of the room when you go to smudge, it may not be super accurate. So I usually do my smudge timers either during a hunt when the ghost is in the same room as me, or if the ghost were to ghost event, that's also another good time to smudge and set a timer. Because when the ghost events, that is like their current location, that's where they are. Minus airballs, I don't ever like smudge an airball ghost event, which we'll talk about later if you aren't familiar with what an airball ghost event is. So yeah, to test for Spirit, smudge the ghost, set a timer for whenever you like hit right click and smudge it. And then if it takes 3 minutes for the ghost to hunt after you smudged it, assuming your sanity is still low enough for the ghost to hunt, then it's most likely a Spirit. And sometimes I'll do like a couple different timers. Like I won't just go off one smudge timer, because sometimes other ghosts are a little lazy and will wait 3 minutes to hunt for whatever reason. So to best test for Spirit, maybe do 2 or 3 smudge timers. Usually 2 smudge timers will tell you if it's a Spirit or not. Alright, the next ghost we're going to talk about is the Wraith. So the Wraith kind of changed a little bit with the new update. Well, I guess I should say all ghosts have changed, meaning that ghosts can now step in salt during hunts, which makes testing for Wraith a little bit easier. But the Wraith, however, is the only ghost that cannot step in salt. So if you see a ghost like walk over a salt pile and leave no footprints, this is a Wraith. So the best way to test for a Wraith is to put salt either in its ghost room, or you could like line the house with salt where you know it's going to walk whenever it's hunting. Then check those salt piles after the hunt. If you set up salt piles in the actual ghost room, you could put up a motion sensor next to the salt pile and see if the ghost activates the motion sensor, aka like is walking over the salt but doesn't step in it. Another hidden ability of the Wraith is that it has a teleport ability. So it will pick like a random player and just teleport to them wherever they are in the map. When they do this, if that person happens to be holding an EMF reader, you'll get a random EMF 2, or if you're playing with evidence, you could get a random EMF 5. So another way to test for Wraith, if you don't have salt, or maybe you used all your salt, and you can't really tell if it's stepping in it or not, is you could go to another part of the house or another part of the building, probably with a crucifix just for extra safety, and sit with this EMF reader at your feet. And if all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you just get a random EMF 2 or random EMF 5, assuming you're playing with evidence, of course, this could also mean that it's a Wraith using its teleport ability. And I say have a crucifix on you because sometimes if the Wraith teleports to you and your sanity is low enough for it to hunt, it could then try to hunt on top of you. So I always try to do my Wraith test with a crucifix, especially if my sanity is low. The next ghost we're going to talk about is the Phantom, which is another ghost that has not really a teleport ability, but a wandering ability. So similar to the Wraith, the Phantom will pick a random player, and it's not always this player, just like whenever it goes to use its wandering ability, it'll just pick a random player, and it will gradually wander to them. Now, you can get an EMF 2 when the Phantom does this. However, that's not normally how I test for Phantom. If all of a sudden a ghost is like doing things near you, like say the ghost room is on the 2nd floor of Edgefield, and you're in the kitchen on Edgefield, and all of a sudden the ghost is in the kitchen on Edgefield, throwing things or ghost eventing, you could then maybe start suspecting one of these teleport wandering ghosts. But how I differentiate between Wraith and Phantom is obviously a Phantom will step in salt, a Wraith will not step in salt. When a Phantom does a ghost event and you take a picture of it, the ghost will disappear, but the event will continue. So like you'll continue to hear the ghost event sounds, and the ghost will just like no longer be visibly in front of you. Also, if you were to check the journal where the photo is, there would be no ghost in the photo, and the photo will be crystal clear, so like no pixelation. Another way to test for Phantom, which might be a little bit more difficult, but also super effective, is to loop the ghost, because a Phantom has a very long blink while it's hunting. And what I mean by blink is so like when you're looping a ghost, it kind of fades in and out. That's what I mean by blinking. And so when a Phantom is hunting, it fades out for much, much longer than it's actually visible. So if you're looping a ghost and like you cannot see it for like a solid like 2 seconds, this is a Phantom. The next ghost we're going to talk about is the Poltergeist. Poltergeists absolutely love throwing things. One of the Poltergeist's hidden abilities is that if you make a pile of items in its ghost room, I don't normally go like super over the top with the items. It doesn't really matter. I usually do at least 4 to 5 items, but you could go ham and put like every single item in the room and see what happens. But it has a chance of exploding that pile of items. And sometimes this takes forever. Like when I was trying to get footage of this for this video, it took me 15 to 20 minutes to actually get the Poltergeist explosion. So if you're like, I've yet to get a Poltergeist to explode a pile of items, just have patience. It'll happen. It just, every ghost and their RNG about their abilities is like different in when they use them. So they will do it. It just takes some time. But another really fun way to test for Poltergeist is to loop the ghost. Like loop it around a surface, say like the kitchen island on Tanglewood or Willow, and put a bunch of items on the kitchen island. And while you're looping a Poltergeist, it has a 100% chance of throwing an item every half second. So it will just absolutely destroy the pile of items on the kitchen island while you're looping it. Now, with the new Ascension update, they like kind of changed the way ghosts throw items while they're hunting. And so a lot of ghosts look like they have the powerful throw of the Poltergeist. But the way I differentiate between a Poltergeist and a non-Poltergeist is the frequency of the throws. So a Poltergeist is like almost going to look like it's throwing 2 things at once, whereas a regular ghost may have like one powerful throw and then maybe won't throw at something for like another second or 2. So with the Poltergeist, you're looking for that crazy frequency of throws along with the powerful throws, and then a regular ghost will not really throw as many things as frequently, if that makes sense, while they're hunting. So if you've been misidentifying a lot of ghosts because they look like Poltergeists when they're not while they're hunting, don't worry. This dropped with the new Ascension update. I'm not sure why. Basically, if I ever doubt a ghost is a Poltergeist when I'm looping it, it's probably not. Like Poltergeists are super obvious. The next ghost we're going to talk about is the Banshee. The Banshee is a super interesting one. So the way the Banshee works is that whenever you start a contract, so say you're playing with a full group of 4 people, it's going to randomly pick one of you as its favorite person. It's going to want to stalk that person. It will only kill that person whenever it goes to hunt. However, the Banshee stalking only works on the same floor. So say you're playing on like Ridgeview and the ghost room is on the 2nd floor and the ghost, you know for sure the ghost is a Banshee. It will only be able to stalk its target if that target were to go to the 2nd floor. Now, that doesn't mean that the target is invincible if the ghost hunts and they're on the 2nd floor. It just means that it may not look like it's stalking you if you're on the 1st floor. Now, if the target is to step outside the house, a Banshee hunts, the Banshee will hunt normally, meaning that every player in the house, while the target's outside, could die. However, if the target is inside the house, safely hiding in a hiding spot, all 3 other players can walk around the house while the Banshee is hunting, I should say, and have no fear of dying. The Banshee will not go for you. Now, if the target somehow dies, the Banshee will then pick a new target and then wash, rinse, repeat. And you may be wondering, well, how do we figure out who's the target? Well, you get to play a game that we like to call Banshee Roulette, where each person takes a turn standing out like to loop the ghost, obviously with a smudge stick, and see if the ghost goes for you. If the ghost targets you and you can loop it and it's getting faster and faster and like actually targeting you, then you're probably the target. And then your friends could stand out and see if the ghost goes for them. And if the ghost completely ignores them, then they're most likely not the target and the ghost is most likely a Banshee. Now, if you're playing on single player, this is a little bit trickier because you can't really play Banshee Roulette if you're the only one in the game, because you're just automatically going to be the target. So no matter what ghost it is, the ghost is going to go for you, right? So what I like to do to test for Banshee is, one, you could grab a paramic because the Banshee has a unique scream that it will give you on the paramic, which can sometimes take a little bit, so you have to be patient. Or what you can also do is, like, say, grab some salt, a motion sensor, and maybe even a crucifix to be extra safe, and go to a different part of the house on the same floor. So, like, maybe on the other side of the house from the ghost room. So, like, in this example, I knew the ghost was in the first room on Tanglewood. So I went into the kitchen on Tanglewood, and I set up a motion sensor and some salt, and I was looking to see if the ghost left that room and came into the kitchen and started interacting with me, activating the motion sensor, stepping on salt, which it did. And then, of course, also got the Banshee scream, which sort of solidified that it was a Banshee. Now, if you have a ghost following you like this and you're playing on solo, it could potentially be a phantom, like we talked about. They like to wander and follow you. But if you haven't gotten a Banshee scream and you aren't sure if it's a Banshee or a phantom, you could either, one, try to take a picture and see if it disappears, or two, loop the ghost and see how visible or invisible it is. The next ghost we're going to talk about is the Jinn. So the way the Jinn works is that its power focuses around the breaker. It is actually the only ghost unable to turn off a breaker. Now, I've had many people be like, Maggie, I've had Jinns turn off the breaker. Well, what likely happened is that there is a certain cap of lights that you can turn on before you pop a breaker, and it's different on every single map. I don't have the exact numbers. I just usually try not to turn on too many lights in the house. But if you notice that when you turn on a light, the breaker pops, that is not the ghost turning off the breaker, that is you turning on too many lights. Or what sometimes happens is you have a bunch of lights on, and all you need is one more light turned on to pop the breaker, and the ghost turns on that light, which pops the breaker. So it may look like the ghost turned off the breaker, but it was actually just the ghost turning on the last light needed to trip the breaker. So, long story short, Jinns can't turn off the breaker. So you're 100% sure see a ghost turn off the breaker. And you can tell if, like, the ghost turned off the breaker if you turned on too many lights to trip the breaker by going to the breaker and turning it back on. And if all the lights immediately come back on when you turn on the breaker, that means you didn't trip the breaker got turned off. Okay, so long story short, Jinns cannot turn off the breaker. The only ghost that can't do this. The main ability of the Jinn is that when the breaker is on and it, like, rounds a corner and sees you from, like, a medium distance, it will instantly get a pep in its step, and so it'll get faster, and then it'll go back down to normal speed when it gets slower to you, and then gradually speed up with line of sight. So the best way I like to test for Jinn is to, like, say, go into the garage on Tanglewood, or an area that has, like, a medium distance so that, like, I can hear the ghost speed before it rounds the corner, and then be able to notice if when it rounds the corner, it gets a pep in its step. So I'll go and show you an example of a Jinn, because it's, like, difficult to explain, but once you see it and hear it, it's a little bit more obvious. Now, if you notice a ghost has this, like, speed up when the breaker is on, if you aren't sure about Jinn and you want to double check, you could always turn off the breaker and do the same test and see if the ghost speeds up again when it rounds the corner and sees you. Because Jinn's ability with its speed only works when the breaker is on. Another ability of the Jinn is that when the breaker is on, of course, the breaker being on, it's so important for the Jinn. If you are near the Jinn, when the breaker is on, it can zap your sanity. And when it does this, it will give you an EMF reading at the breaker, which is a little difficult to test for. I normally don't test for Jinn this way. But if in this situation, I actually had a Jinn in the left storage room of the Willow Street basement, and the breaker was right by the ghost room. So I put a EMF reader on the breaker, sat near the ghost room to see if I ever got a random EMF reading at the breaker. Now, when the ghost turns off the breaker, it'll give you an EMF reading. But obviously at this point, you would know it's not a Jinn because it turned off the breaker. So if the breaker stays on and you're in the ghost room and you get a random EMF reading at the breaker, this is most likely the Jinn ability. Now, if you have a sanity monitor, you can also step outside and see if your sanity just all of a sudden dropped. But if you're playing on Nightmare or Insanity or another difficulty, it's kind of impossible to do. And I've also had questions on whether or not a Jinn can do this ability when the breaker is broken. The answer is no. The Jinn can only zap your sanity like this, and you can only get an EMF reading at the breaker when the breaker is turned on. Alright, the next ghost we're going to talk about is the Mare. So the way the Mare works is that it does not like the light whatsoever. The Mare can hunt you at 60% sanity if it is in the dark. So if the light in its ghost room is like turned off, it could hunt you at 60% sanity, or like average group sanity. Otherwise, if the light is turned on or it's in a room where the light is on, it can't hunt you until you're at 40% sanity or 40% average group sanity. Another thing I've noticed about Mare, depending on what difficulty you're playing on, basically depending on whether or not the ghost can change its favorite room and how high the wandering is set to, a Mare will typically change its favorite room if you leave the light on in its room for too long. This isn't like a super telltale way to tell for a Mare, but if you notice the ghost is like super wandery and maybe like changed its room and the light was on in its room, and Mare is an option, then you can maybe consider it. The Mare is also the only ghost that cannot turn on a light. So if you see a ghost turn on a light, you can immediately cross off Mare. Now, before the Ascension update, you could also cross off Mare if the ghost turned on the TV or the computer, but this is no longer the case. Mares are now able to turn on computers and TVs. Another hidden ability of the Mare is that it has a chance to immediately turn off a light after you've turned it on. And it's usually pretty instant. Like you turn on a light and it'll immediately turn it off. Now I always check if I see this to see if there's a ghost event, because ghost events also typically turn off the light after you turn them on. So if you've turned on the light, the ghost has turned it off and there is no ghost event to be seen, this is most likely the Mare ability. And the Mare light switch ability can actually happen when the breaker is broken. So if the breaker is not yet on and you go into a room and turn the light on and it's a Mare, it could immediately turn it back off. All right, the next ghost we're going to talk about is the Revenant. And the Revenant is super easy to tell from its hunting behavior. The only way to differentiate a Revenant from other ghosts is to see its speed while it's hunting. When a Revenant is hunting and it doesn't detect any players, so say you're safely hiding and you hear the ghost start hunting, it's going to be very slow. And then the second it were to detect a player, like say you had your flashlight on, or maybe you accidentally pressed your push to talk, the Rev is going to get super duper fast and go to that location. Then if you were to smudge the Revenant or break line of sight with it and lose it, it will gradually go back down to its slow speed. So, long story short, when Revenant is hunting, it is very, very slow. The second it detects a player, it gets really, really fast. And then if it were to be smudged or you lose line of sight, it's going to gradually go back down to its slow speed. Alright, the next ghost we're going to talk about is the Shade. So the way the Shade works is that it is a very shy ghost. The Shade is said to not hunt in the same room as a player. However, this can be kind of tricky depending on the map you're on, because there are certain rooms that are divided weirdly. So it may look like a ghost hunted on top of you when it actually didn't. So like, for example, the Ridgeview Garage, I have had Shades hunt on me in that room, even though they shouldn't have, because I guess the room's just divided weirdly. But typically, so like say you're on Tanglewood and you're in the first room, or if you're on Willow Street, in my example, and you're in the living room where the ghost room is, and it's a Shade, the Shade will not hunt on top of you. You will literally have to step outside of the room, and then the Shade would be able to hunt. So like in this example, I had crucifixes set up in the room, and the ghost was not hunting. The second I stepped out of the room, the ghost immediately used the crucifix. It's like not doing any... Yeah. Okay, that's a Shade. As soon as he left the room, just straight up use the crucifix. Shades are also much less active than other ghosts. So if you're going against a ghost and it's like hardly doing anything, you've been in the game for a while, you know your sanity's dropped a little bit, it could most likely be a Shade. Shades also tend to prioritize airball ghost events more than other ghost events. And if you use the summoning circle, monkey paw, or music box against a Shade, you also have a chance of getting a shadowy ghost event as the ghost event that is like created by that cursed possession. It doesn't always happen against Shades, but Shades are the only ghosts that can give you a shadowy ghost event when you use those items. All right, the next ghost we're going to talk about is the Demon, kind of like the polar opposite of the Shade. The demon has a rare ability where it can hunt you at any sanity. So hypothetically, you could walk into a house at 100% sanity and a demon can hunt you. Now this doesn't always happen. I've had some super lazy demons that never did this, but there is a chance. Demons are also the only ghosts that can hunt you after 60 seconds of smudging them. So similarly to like I was talking about the spirit, if you set a correct smudge timer and the ghost then hunts under 90 seconds. So most ghosts have to wait 90 seconds to hunt you, but a demon could hunt you after 60 seconds. So if you're looping a ghost, you smudge it, set a timer, and then it then hunts somewhere between 60 seconds and 90 seconds. This is likely a demon. But I usually do a couple smudge tests against ghosts because sometimes I've actually had demons wait 3 minutes to hunt. So I thought they were a spirit. It just, every ghost is kind of different about how often they want to use their abilities. Demons are also the only ghosts that could hunt every 20 seconds if they want to. Every other ghost has to wait 25 seconds. And the crucifix range on a demon is actually increased depending on the tier of crucifix that you're using. So if you notice a ghost super easily using a crucifix and it's maybe not like super properly placed in the room, this could also mean that it's a demon. The next ghost we're going to talk about is the Yurei. So the Yurei's hidden ability is kind of boring. The basic ability of the Yurei is that it can fully close a door from open to shut. Like outside of a ghost event, outside of its hunting, like say you're just chilling in the ghost room and all of a sudden you have the door slam on you. This is the Yurei ability, and when it does this, it will also drain your sanity. And sometimes the Yurei kind of fails to do this ability, and so instead you'll hear like a double door touch, like 2 touches at one time. This is also something unique to the Yurei. Now, the double door touch can kind of be hard to hear, and sometimes you'd be like, wait, was that the Yurei ability? But once you hear it enough, you'll be like, oh wait, that was the Yurei ability. The Yurei is also the only ghost that can fully slam the front door, like outside of a hunt, outside of a ghost event. So if you happen to have a ghost whose ghost room is by the front door and it is just slamming that front door like all the time, is most likely a Yurei. The Yurei is also the only ghost that can leave an EMF reading on the front door. So again, if you have a ghost near the front door, you could leave an EMF reader by the front door and see if you get an EMF reading on the front door. Outside of the door slamming ability, the Yurei also has an ability where if you smudge it, it will then be trapped in its ghost room for 60 seconds. So if you're not sure if it's a Yurei and it's not doing the door slamming ability, you could potentially smudge the ghost, either like during a hunt or maybe like a ghost event that was in its room, and have a motion sensor set up in the doorway and see if the ghost ever leaves the room during those 60 seconds. So you start your smudge timer right when you smudge it and make sure you aren't like activating the motion sensor yourself. And if the ghost leaves the room during that 60 seconds, you can cross off Yurei. However, this test hasn't been like super accurate in my experience because sometimes if I'm testing between Yurei and Goryo, which we'll talk about Goryo later, sometimes Goryos just don't leave the room so they can then look like Yureis. So I usually only use this smudge test as a last resort against a Yurei if I'm trying to decide, I guess I should say, if the ghost is a Yurei or not. The next ghost we're going to talk about is the Oni. So the main tell for the Oni is that 1, it cannot do an airball ghost event. So the ghost event where you have like a giant ball of mist coming towards you and it hits you and like hisses. Onis are not able to do that. Now there's another ghost event that's kind of like a walking ghost event that also kind of ends in that hiss. But if you hear footsteps at any point during the ghost event, this is not an airball. The second main tell for an Oni is that while it's hunting, it hardly blinks at all. Like it is super duper visible. So if you're looping a ghost and you have absolutely no trouble seeing it, it's most likely an Oni. Next ghost we're going to talk about is the Yokai. So the way the Yokai works is that it is very hard of hearing. So the way I like to test for Yokai, there's a couple ways. And the most famous map for testing for Yokai is Willow Street. Because if the ghost room is not the living room, and you're trying to test for Yokai, you can sit in the living room with the door shut, your flashlight on, and just sit at the door, the glass door, and look to see if the ghost is ever attracted to your flashlight and comes into the living room. Against a Yokai, unless it is like accidentally pathing into the living room anyways, it will not even notice you sitting there with your flashlight on. You could be yelling at it. It just won't hear you. Now you can also do this test on other maps. Similarly, go into a room, shut the door with your flashlight on, and see if the ghost finds you. Now you have to do yokai tests on the same floor. Ghosts can't hear you in between floors, so just make sure you're doing the yokai tests on the same floor. Obviously with a smudge stick, and make sure that you can retreat to a hiding spot nearby. Another way I like to test for yokai is if you're on a map with like a kitchen island that you can crouch loop behind, is I'll get the attention of the ghost with my flashlight on, crouch, and then start looping. And if the ghost just all of a sudden loses me and just goes to somewhere else in the house, then it's most likely yokai. Yokais also have a chance to hunt you at 80% sanity if you're talking near them. So if you're trying to find evidence and you're using the spirit box and all of a sudden the ghost starts hunting and you know your sanity's about 80%, it could potentially be a yokai. Next ghost we're going to talk about is the Hantu. And the way the Hantu works is that it is slower while it's hunting, I should say. It is slower in warm temperatures and faster in cold temperatures. The Hantu is also one of the ghosts that does not gradually speed up with line of sight. So a great way to test for a Hantu is to loop the ghost, see how fast it is coming out of its ghost room, and then if it's like really fast and then kind of slows down when it comes towards you, and then you start looping it and it's not gradually getting faster and faster, it can most potentially be a Hantu. Now sometimes it can be confusing to differentiate between Hantu and Dio, which we'll talk about Deogens later. But one way I like to differentiate between the two is because like a Dio is really fast when it comes towards you and then slows down, is that one, a Deogen's going to be way more visible while it's hunting. And two, if you let the ghost get really close to you, as close as you feel comfortable with, Hantus aren't going to get slower and slower, but a Dio will basically slow down to almost a standstill if you let it get close enough to you. And now this is the first time we're going to talk about forced evidence. And forced evidence meaning that whatever difficulty you're playing on, even if you're playing on insanity with one piece of evidence, this ghost must have that evidence. And the Hantu has freezing temperatures as forced evidence. So if you're playing on insanity and you get your one piece of evidence and it's not freezing temperatures, you could then cross off Hantu. And then if you're playing on like Nightmare and you get your two pieces of evidence and neither of those are freezing, you could then also cross off Hantu. And there's a few other ghosts that have forced evidence, which we'll talk about later. And if you're playing on a difficulty with 0 evidence, a ghost with forced evidence does not have to have this evidence. The only ghost that would have evidence on a 0 evidence is a Mimic, which we'll talk about later. Another characteristic of the Hantu is that if you were to turn off the breaker, or if the breaker is broken while the Hantu is hunting, you will be able to see its breath. So the best place to probably see this is on Camp Woodwind. If you have the breaker off and you're looping the ghost and you can see its breath, that is a characteristic of the Hantu. And now sometimes you may be seeing your own breath, so don't confuse your own breath with the ghost having breath. It's pretty obvious when you see it, like it's coming straight from the ghost's mouth. This is strictly characteristic of a Hantu. Next ghost we're going to talk about is the Goryo, which unfortunately the Goryo is probably one of the most boring ghosts when it comes to hidden abilities. Sorry, Goryo. But the main tell for Goryo is that one, it has forced evidence of dots, and these dots you will only see through a video camera when you're not in the same room as a Goryo. So when I test for Goryo, if I'm playing on multiplayer, I ask for everyone to step out of the room, and then I stand like across the threshold of the room, and I look into the room with a video camera and see if I see dots only through the video camera, or if I also see them in person. Because Goryo dots you only see through a video camera. Now, I guess you could test for this from the van, but at that point, you wouldn't really know if they also have it in person. But if you've been sitting in the ghost room for a while and you don't see any dots, and the second you go back to the van, and then you see dots on the video camera, this could also mean that it's a Goryo. The Goryo is also the only ghost that will not change its favorite room, which isn't like super telling. Sometimes ghosts just don't change their favorite room. But if you're playing on a difficulty with 0 evidence, that's the only way you can tell if it's a Goryo or not, is if it just refuses to change its favorite room. Next ghost we're going to talk about is the Myling. So the main way to tell from Myling is that it is super quiet while it's hunting. To test for Myling, I will usually hide in a hiding spot with my flashlight at my feet. The flashlight will not alert the ghost if it's turned on at your feet, by the way. So I'll sit in a hiding spot with my flashlight at my feet, and then once the ghost is on the same floor as me, if I only hear its footsteps when my flashlight starts flickering, that means it's a Myling. Every other ghost, when they're on the same floor as you, you will hear their footsteps before your flashlight starts flickering. Now you could also do like a Myling test with your walkie-talkie if for some reason you don't have a flashlight. Like if you only hear the ghost footsteps when your walkie-talkie starts going, this could also mean that it's a Myling. Now Mylings and Raijus, which we'll talk about later, can be a little bit confusing because Raijus affect your electronic equipment from farther away. But Raijus get faster on electronic equipment, so that will be the main way that you tell between Raiju and Myling. Mylings are also said to be way more talkative on the paramic. I don't always take this to heart though, because again, some ghost abilities are a little bit RNG about how much they use them in a game. However, its footsteps will always be super quiet while it's hunting. Next ghost we're going to talk about is the Onryo. So the basic way that an Onryo works is that it hates firelight. It cannot hunt within 4 meters of a lit candle. They also can hunt at any sanity if they blow out like 3 candles in quick succession. However, I feel like this is a very nuanced thing because typically you don't have candles very early on. Like while you're playing, you're trying to find evidence. And as long as you have a crucifix nearby, a crucifix will prevent it. So I'm going to mention the candle blowing out it's usually like 3 candles in quick succession. An Onryo can hunt at any sanity, but this is normally not how I test for Onryo. The way I test for an Onryo is that I put 2 crucifixes like near the ghost room, properly spaced apart, and then I put a candle on each crucifix, and I light the candle. If the ghost is able to use the crucifix underneath a lit candle, then it is not an Onryo. An Onryo would first have to blow out the candle to then use the crucifix. Now, the tier 3 crucifix has an increased range of 5 meters, and the candle only covers a 4 meter range, so you may need an extra candle in the room if you're using a tier 3 crucifix. But typically, if I'm going against a ghost, and I have crucifixes and candles set up, and the ghost is refusing to hunt with those candles being lit, assuming my sanity is like low enough for it to hunt, and it's blowing out the candles like crazy, like Onryos will even blow out the lighter in your hand like crazy, then it's most likely an Onryo. Onryos are also said to blow out candles more frequently the more people that have died. So if you're playing in like a full group and you're the only person left, an Onryo will typically blow out the candles like crazy. Now I usually play on single player, so I don't see this very often, but something you could look out for if this happens to you. Oh, both those just went out. Yeah, as soon as those candles went out, I like happily used the crucifix in the living room. Alright. You, my friend, are guilty of being an Onryo. Alright, the next ghosts we're going to talk about are the twins. So the way the twins work is that when they hunt, they don't send out 2 ghosts at one time. It's always just the one ghost. However, when they hunt, the ghost will either be slightly slower than normal or slightly faster than normal. And sometimes this speed can be a little tough to notice. What I normally do to figure out if a ghost speed is normal is I'll sing, "This is the rhythm of the night." If the footsteps match up to that, then it's most likely normal speed. And if I have to either like speed up the rhythm of that song or slow it down, then it's most likely not normal speed. And again, this can sound tricky and it can take a little time to hear normal ghost speed, but I can actually put a link in the description that has a really good tool to figure out what your ghost speed is. It has like a little tool where you like literally click along to the speed of the ghost and it can tell you like how fast the ghost is. But once you play enough, you kind of start hearing what a normal ghost sounds like, and then you'll start hearing if the ghost, you're like, wait, that's like a little bit slower than normal speed. Now, outside of a hunt, the twins can seem like they're doing things in 2 places at one time. So you'll have the ghost room where the ghost is like giving most of its evidence. But then if the twins decide to use like more of the decoy ghost, which is the faster ghost, which isn't really relevant to what we're talking about right now. But it can seem like it's doing things in another room. Sometimes it'll even hunt from a different room. And it won't always be the faster twin that hunts from the other room. Like when the twins hunt, it doesn't always send out the fast twin and then next hunt the slow twin, next hunt the fast twin. Sometimes we'll send out the slow twin or the fast twin like 3 or 4 hunts in a row. But outside of a hunt, twins can do 2 interactions at one time. So if you're sitting there and you hear 2 objects get thrown at once, maybe one in the room you're in, and then one in a different room, that is called a twin interaction. And if you were to then go look at the activity board, assuming it's not broken, you'll see these like kind of wonky lines on the board. where they're either like slightly curved inwards or slightly curved outwards. And that is a twin interaction exclusive to the twins. Now the twins can get slightly confusing with the Moroi, but I'll wait till we get to the Moroi before I talk about that. All right, next ghost we're going to talk about is the Raiju. And the way the Raiju works when it's hunting is it is faster around powered electronics. So say if you're hiding with your flashlight on and the ghost is normal speed, and then when it gets closer to you, it just all of a sudden gets really fast. This most likely could be a Raiju getting faster around your electronics. And like I mentioned with Myling, they also can affect your electronics from farther away. So if you're like sitting in the Tanglewood kitchen and the ghost is like all the way in the first bedroom and you're like pressing your radio and it's affecting it from that far away, it could most likely be a Raiju. And same with your flashlight. Like if you're sitting in the Tanglewood kitchen and the ghost is affecting your flashlight like all the way from the front bedroom, this could also be a Raiju. Raijus will also affect your equipment from farther away while they're ghost eventing. Raijus are also an early hunting ghost. Raijus can hunt you early if they are nearby powered electronic equipment. So how I like to test for Raiju, if I think Raiju is an option, is I will take note of all my electronics. I will try to have at least just like one electronic somewhere in the house. I'll take all the rest of them out and just say maybe set my flashlight in the hallway. And then I pay attention to its speed when it's far away from my flashlight, and then pay attention to the speed when it gets closer to my flashlight. And if it speeds up near my flashlight or whatever electronic you choose to use, assuming it's turned on. So like a photo camera, usually they aren't supposed to affect it if it's like just sitting there on the ground, or like dots that are turned off, they will not get faster around those. However, if you're like looping a Raiju and you have your camera in your hand, it will get faster around it. But if you have your camera in your offhand, no electronics in your hand, it shouldn't get faster. Raijus will also get faster if you are using like a head camera, like a GoPro or night vision goggles, and they're turned on. If they're turned off on your head, they should not affect the Raiju. Next ghost we're going to talk about is the Obake, which is my personal favorite ghost. The Obake is another ghost that has a forced evidence being fingerprints. And when the Obake interacts with like a surface, so say a door or a window where they can leave fingerprints, they have a 75% chance of leaving fingerprints. So if you notice a ghost touch a door and it has ultraviolet as evidence, but it's not leaving fingerprints, this is most likely an Obake. Every other ghost that has ultraviolet as evidence will always leave fingerprints when it touches a surface that can have ultraviolet. Also, when an Obake steps in salt, it will leave fewer footprints on the ground than other ghosts. The Obake also has a chance of leaving a 6-fingered fingerprint whenever it touches like a door or a window, which looks like this. But probably the most fun characteristic of an Obake is that while it's hunting, every time it blinks, it has a 6.66% chance of shapeshifting. And Obakes will only shapeshift between the same gender ghost model. So say if your ghost model is male, it will only then shapeshift between other male ghost models, and same with the female ones. There's also a slight nuanced thing where if your ghost happens to be, like say, the little demon child girl, what I call her, in the same hunt, if she's chasing you and all of a sudden she starts crawling and then goes back up to standing, this is also an Obake characteristic. So there's two ghost models that have like different stances when they hunt. It's the little demon child and then the pajama girl ghost model, who I call Mary, Helen, Heather. So in the same hunt, if they change their stances, this is also an Obake characteristic. However, if those ghost models are one hunt standing and the next hunt crawling, this is not an Obake thing. They can change stances like in different hunts, but in the same hunt, if it happens, only Obakes can do that. Which is a very small nuanced thing. I've only seen it a few times, but it can happen. Next ghost we're going to talk about is the Mimic, which is another ghost with forced evidence, which is orbs. However, orbs don't technically count as evidence for a Mimic. So like if you're marking in your journal the evidence, the Mimic's official evidence is ultraviolet, freezing, and spirit box. However, if you were to look in the ghost room against a Mimic, you will also see orbs. See if I click that, it will cross it off. So on difficulties of amateur, intermediate, and professional, the Mimic is the only ghost that will have 4 evidence. However, you don't want to mark ghost orbs against the Mimic because it will cross it off. On Nightmare, the Mimic will be the only ghost that has 3 evidence. So either ultraviolet freezing, ultraviolet spirit box, so on and so forth, plus ghost orbs. And on insanity, the mimic will be the only ghost that has 2 pieces of evidence. So like ultraviolet, then orbs, spirit box, then orbs, or freezing, then orbs. So my general rule of thumb is if I'm playing on difficulty and I get any combination of this. So like say I'm playing on Nightmare and I get like ultraviolet, spirit box, ultraviolet freezing, or like spirit box and freezing, I then always check for ghost orbs. Because at this point, you already have like, if you're on Nightmare, you're like, okay, I got my 2 evidence. However, it could be a mimic. And you would be able to tell that if you went to the room and you saw ghost orbs. Because on Nightmare, you're only supposed to get 2 evidence. So if you then have a 3rd evidence, that's a mimic. So yeah, any combination of ultraviolet, freezing, and spirit box, I always then check for orbs. Now, if you're playing on a difficulty with no evidence, the mimic will be the only ghost with evidence, which is orbs. So it actually makes it one of the easiest ghosts to identify on no evidence if you remember to check for ghost orbs. Now, outside of evidence, the way the mimic works is that it chooses a ghost at random and then will mimic their behaviors. So for example, if the mimic chooses to mimic a Banshee, it would then act like a Banshee. It would pick one target, stalk that target, only go for that person during a hunt. It can also get a Banshee scream against a mimic if it is currently mimicking a Banshee, which I actually got for the first time recently, which is insanely cool. Oh no. No way! Oh. But then next hunt, the mimic could choose to become like a Deogen, which we haven't talked about yet. But they'll basically at that point just mimic its speed. Oh, it's a mimic! Oh god, I think it's a Dio. It's a Dio, can you smudge? I think the only thing that a mimic can't mimic is evidence-related things. So like say it could not have Goryo dots. So aka like dots you could only see through a video camera. And it could also mimic like the Hantu breath while it's hunting, if the breaker is turned off if it wanted to. I'm not going to go through every specific ghost and tell you what it could mimic. It just, all the abilities, the hunting characteristics or outside hunting characteristics that I've talked about, a mimic could do. Like it could pretend to be a Wraith and not step in salt, and then next hunt, walk over that same salt pile and step in it when it's like changed from being a Wraith. It makes sense. So if for some reason you haven't checked for orbs and you have a ghost that is normal speed and then all of a sudden the next hunt it becomes a Revenant, it has Revenant speed, this is a mimic. The mimic is the only ghost that can change its behaviors. Now a mimic doesn't always change its ghost every hunt. Sometimes it'll wait a hunt or 2. And sometimes they'll just mimic like all the normal speeded ghosts, so it's hard to tell. But the easiest way to tell for a mimic is just to look for the orbs, and then depending on what difficulty you're playing for, look for the other evidence. Alright, the next ghost we're going to talk about is the Moroi. The way the Moroi works is that its speed when it's hunting is dependent on your sanity. So the higher your sanity, the slower the Moroi will be. And the lower your sanity, the faster the Moroi will be. The Moroi also has force evidence of Spirit Box. And when you do get that Spirit Box evidence, the Moroi will then curse you, which means your sanity will then start draining twice as fast. So even if you're inside the house, underneath a light, with a candle lit, your sanity will continue to drain. And the only way to remove this curse is to take sanity pills. You can also get cursed by the Moroi if you get a parabolic mic response. So a fun way to test for Moroi is if you get a Spirit Box response, if you're playing on a difficulty where you have a sanity monitor, go outside, check your sanity, then grab a candle, go back inside the house for a couple minutes, obviously with the candle lit. You could even stand in the light. And assuming like no ghost events have hit you and you stayed in the light, had your candle lit, if you go back outside the house and your sanity had continued to drain, so say your sanity dropped by like 10%, you're most likely cursed by a Moroi. Now when the Moroi hunts, its speed can be kind of confusing. Like I talked about earlier, sometimes Moroi and twins can be a little confusing because depending on what your sanity is or what your average group sanity is, it may sound like the slow twin or the fast twin. So a couple ways to differentiate between the two is to either one, wait till your sanity is at 0%, because it's going to be way, way faster than the fast twin. Secondly, you can see if the ghost is fast one hunt and then the next hunt is kind of slow, which as long as you haven't taken any sanity pills and your sanity hasn't gone up for any reason, a Moroi shouldn't do that. And at that point, it would be the twins having sent out the slower twin. But a really easy way to test for Moroi is if you know your sanity is low, when the ghost is hunting, you'll hear it be fast. You could take a sanity pill, which will increase your sanity, and then listen to the ghost speed and see if it gradually gets slower and slower while it's hunting. Because the Moroi speed will change during a hunt depending on what's happening with your sanity. The Moroi is also the only ghost that gets blinded for an additional few seconds, depending on what tier of smudge you're using. And this can kind of be hard to test for with a tier 1 smudge, because a tier 1 smudge only adds an additional 2.5 seconds of blindness to a Moroi. And what I mean by blindness is like, so when you light a smudge, the ghost kind of forgets where you are and who you are for, well, 5 seconds for a tier 1 smudge. Well, the Moroi doesn't know where you are for an additional amount of time. So this could be a way that you could test for Moroi, if none of the other tests are proving helpful, is you could smudge the ghost and see if it ignores you for an additional amount of time. But like I mentioned, the tier 1 smudge stick, it's kind of hard to notice that extra 2.5 seconds of blindness, especially if a Moroi chooses to, like, for some reason, continue to be in the room and kind of path near you. So I usually go for either the sanity pill test, or I let my sanity get to 0% and see if it's like really, really, really fast. Another characteristic of the Moroi is that when it's chasing you, it will get gradually faster and faster and faster. Like, it'll increase with line of sight speed. And another fast ghost, which is the Thaye, which we'll talk about later, doesn't do that. So if you're playing like on 0 evidence, or you don't have sanity pills to test for Moroi, you could pay attention to see if it's gradually getting faster and faster and faster as it's chasing you. All right, the next ghost we're going to talk about is the Deogen, which is many people's favorite ghost. The way the Deo works is that it knows where you are at all times. No matter how well you're hidden, it will come and find you. And when it's far away from you, it will be very, very, very fast. But then when it gets close to you, it will slow down to absolute snail pace. So many people like the Deogen because it is the easiest ghost to loop. So long story short, if the Deogen is potentially an option as one of your ghost types, and the ghost is getting close to be able to hunt, maybe don't hide, or at least hide with a smudge stick. If you hear a ghost get really fast and then come outside your claws and get really slow, I would then probably smudge and go away. Not to be confused with the Revenant, because sometimes Deos and Revenants can actually get confusing, because if for somehow the ghost, if it's a Revenant and it detects you, it's going to be really, really fast. And then if it somehow gets smudged, it's going to slow down. So sometimes they seem like Deos. However, Deogen can't hunt until 40% sanity. So you usually have enough time to either find like the evidence you need, or at least get set up to not get pounced on by a Deogen. Deogens also have Spirit Box as forced evidence, and they also have this unique growl that they give you on the Spirit Box. And to get this Spirit Box response, you actually have to be like right on top of the ghost. So if you know you're going against a Deo and you're trying to get this response, you could like set up motion sensors or like listen for it to throw something and then go to that spot and try to get the Spirit Box response. But it'll sound something like this. All right, and last but not least, we have the Thaye, which is another super interesting ghost. So the way the Thaye works is that when you first start a contract, it is super young, and it is the only ghost that will progressively age as you're in the game. And the way you age a Thaye is just by being near it. Every couple minutes, it will progressively get older and older. But if for some reason you start a contract and you have not aged the Thaye, and it is still super young, it could hunt you at 75% sanity. And when it does hunt at that point, it's going to be very, very fast. But like I mentioned earlier, the Thaye is one of the ghosts that don't gradually get faster and faster and faster with line of sight. So the ghosts that don't gradually get faster with line of sight are Revenant, Hantu, Raiju when powered by electronic equipment, Thaye, and then a mimic that happens to mimic any of those ghosts. So basically, if you start a contract, you haven't located the ghost, and your sanity or your average group sanity is at 75%, and the ghost starts hunting and is very fast, it is most likely a Thaye. However, if you're playing on a small map, you'll probably find the ghost room before that point, and you'll have gotten things set up. You probably have aged the Thaye a little bit, and so then its hunting threshold will drop down. So when you age a Thaye, like I said, it'll get less aggressive, won't hunt you as early, depending on your sanity, but if it were to hunt, it's going to be slower. So every time it ages, it gets gradually slower. To the point, like if you age the Thaye enough, it would almost seem as slow as a Deogen. The The Thaye is also the only ghost that will change its age on the Ouija board. So if you ask the ghost its age at the beginning of the contract, and then you ask it a few minutes later what its age is and it goes up, that means it's a Thaye. Well, those are the ghost abilities I have for you guys in this video. Hopefully I covered everything. As always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. It did take me a long time to get all the footage of these ghosts, so if you can, definitely make sure to drop the video a like. If you'd love to drop me a sub, good luck ghost hunting, and I will see you in the next one.